What is flour, and what is the difference between whole grain flour and white flour, also known as all-purpose flour? And what about all the other types of flours like rice flour, almond flour, bean flour, corn flour, also known as cornmeal, corn starch, sorghum flour, potato starch, tapioca starch, etc.? There are a lot of choices. So basically, when it comes to flour, you have true flours and you have starches. True flour typically comes from crushed and finely ground up grain, but you can also have different types of flour from nuts, seeds, beans, or corn. You can even make flour from dried inner tree bark and dried winter squash. It is basically a whole food that gets crushed and turned into a dry powder. Starches are different. They are a substance, a complex carbohydrate that typically come from the tuber or root of a plant. Starches can often be soaked out of the root with water. Starches don't contain the whole food they came from. They are more like an extract from the root. For example, when you make hash browns and you grate the potatoes and soak them in water, as they soak, you'll see a layer of starch form on the bottom of your bowl. You can remove the potatoes, pour off the water, collect the whitish layer of starch on the bottom of the bowl, dry it, and cook with it. It is potato starch. Potato flour, on the other hand, is made from whole potatoes that are dried and then ground into a fine powder. Common starches are potato starch, cornstarch, tapioca starch, and arrowroot starch. There are many other types of starches in the world, such as starch from cattail roots. So back to flour, we'll talk about wheat, since it is the most common grain used in the world. There are hard wheats, often used for making bread, and soft wheats, often used for making pastries. Hard wheats usually have a high protein content, which is good for making breads. Wheat and many other grains such as spelt, rye, barley, kamut, millet, einkorn, brown rice, etc., all come in a whole grain form, also known as a kernel or a berry. Whole wheat grains, whole wheat kernels, and whole wheat berries are all the same thing. This also applies to all the other grains. The whole wheat kernel or whole wheat berry looks like this. Whole grains generally have three parts. The outside layer is often called the bran, which contains antioxidants, B vitamins, minerals, and fiber, which is important. The inside filler is called the endosperm, which is the fluffy white part you know as white flour or all-purpose flour. They're the same thing. It contains starchy carbohydrates, protein, and a few vitamins and minerals. It does not contain fiber. The last part of the grain is the germ, which is the small part inside the grain that produces the sprout when it is planted. The germ contains protein, B vitamins, healthy fats, vitamin E, phytonutrients, and a few other minerals and vitamins. So back to flour, when this whole grain or kernel is crushed and ground up, it is known as whole grain flour because it uses the entire whole grain. White flour only uses the inside of the grain and thus does not contain many important nutrients and fiber. Flour is made by using a grain mill. The whole grains are put into the mill and ground into a powder. You can make fine ground flour or coarse ground, it's your choice. There are many, many different types of grain mills on the market. The most common types are stone mills, burst mills, and hand crank mills. Some are electric and some are not. Some are flimsy and small, and some are solid and heavy duty. Some can grind oily seeds and some cannot. Grain mills range in size, cost, and quality. There are different types of mills for grinding flint corn or flour corn, which is really hard stuff to grind. And this is how you make cornmeal or corn flour. There are also mills used for rolling grains or cracking grains known as Flaker mills, which is how you make oatmeal, cracked oats, Scottish oats, and granulated rice. Mills can use stone grinding plates or metal plates to crush and grind the grains. The different plates will give you different textures of flours. I have used many types of mills over the years and even wore one out. And at this point, I particularly like the stone mills, but they produce a slightly coarser flour. Flour mills, often known as burst mills, will produce a very finely powdered flour, which is often used for breads. So this is your personal choice on the type of mill and flours you want. I personally use a Como stone mill. I use the finest setting on my mill. Back to flour. The flour that comes out of your machine is whole grain flour. Then, to make white flour, you put the whole grain flour into some sifters or fine screen mesh containers and start shaking. The fine white flour will come out, leaving the bran and the germ caught in the sifter or screens. The white flour that falls through the sifter is white flour or all-purpose flour. Many companies often sift this flour a few times to remove all the bran and germ, and then they bleach the flour to make it very white. Obviously, this is not very healthy. So I am a big fan of whole grain flour. The key is to use sourdough to break down the flour so you can digest it and get all the nutrition you can out of it. Like I mentioned in an earlier video, we are not farm animals with multiple stomach chambers, so we need to break down our whole grains and our whole grain flours before we eat them. Grains, beans, nuts, and seeds all contain harmful anti-nutrients known as phytates, oxalates, and lectins. These things can be very damaging to the body, rob the body of valuable minerals, cause toxicity, cause inflammation, and cause many other health problems. Anti-nutrients can be greatly reduced or destroyed by sourdoughing, soaking, and sprouting. Breads that are not sourdoughhed are usually made with standard yeast or rapid rise yeast and quick rise methods, which do not properly break down the flour. And a large majority of breads you purchase in the stores or restaurants are not good for you because they are not fermented with sourdough. The flour has not been broken down properly, and this is part of why so many diets recommend not eating bread. And they're right. If the bread is not sourdoughhed, it is generally not very good for you. This also includes gluten-free breads. They should also be made with sourdough and fermented. I frequently hear people say, "I'm better eating white bread than whole wheat bread. I don't feel good with whole wheat bread." Yes, because again, you're not a farm animal. You weren't designed to eat whole grains unless they've been fermented. On a side note, you can also sprout whole grains, which absolutely helps with digesting the grain. This is a good thing too. Additionally, you lose a lot of nutrition by just eating white flour breads, so it's worth the effort to bake with whole grain flour. But again, just learn to ferment it with sourdough. And last of all, if all you have is white flour, or that's all your family will eat, then definitely ferment it with sourdough. It brings some life back to the white flour and makes it a much better food. Let's get to the video and I'll show you how to quickly grind flour and how I store it. Hi everybody, we're going to talk about grain mills today and how to grind it and how to package up the flour. So let's go. Okay, so over the years of grinding a lot of grain, I've had multiple mills. I had a Wonder Mill for years, which was a great little mill. I wound up getting rid of it because I needed something a little bit bigger. And then I wound up going to a Mill, which is the one that I used so much that I wore out. So I wound up getting another one. And while I was waiting for this one to show up, I wound up getting the Mill and found out that I absolutely love this mill. I don't get any kickbacks from these companies, so this is just my own personal experience. And then I'm also going to walk you through the Quaker City corn mill that is available at Lehman's. Also, I'm not selling this for them. I just really like this mill. And then there's another one that I've had for probably 30 years now, and this is what I use. It's my Flaker Mill, but there's other ones out there. But I'll just show you what I use, and then you can make up your own decision, make up your own mind and figure out what it is that will work for you. But I'll just show you what it is that I use and have been using for years. All right, this is the Como mill. This is a little bit bigger version. They have all sorts of different sizes, so it depends on how much flour you're grinding, how big your family is, if it's just you, or what the job is that's needed here. So it's pretty simple. Let me tip this down just a little bit so you can see it better. Okay, so it has a lid that is removable. And if you look here, it has a spout. And so you put your grain in the top here and the flour comes out this. Pretty simple. The grinding plates are down deep inside. You can't see them. This is the on-off switch, and that's pretty much it. Very, very basic. You're going to need a bowl. I like these big old metal bowls, but use whatever you've got. So you just put that underneath there to catch the flour. And we'll just get right into this. So this is some whole grain spelt. So as I was shown on the video, the whole grains, they look like this. You can use wheat, barley, millet, rye, spelt, anything that you want to use. So you just turn your switch on. And this, being the stone mill, has a little bit different sound than some of your other ones, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. I'm going to set this off. Okay, so I just did a little bit of grain there. Bump this back up again. So usually when I grind flour, I fill this bowl completely full because I do quite a bit at a time. So that's it. That's all there is to making flour. Super, super simple. So put this one away. Okay, this one right here, this is the Mill. And it looks like this. It's a completely different setup. So it comes with its own little built-in container here. Scale this back so you've got enough room. You can see this. And this is where the flour feeds into after it's done grinding. This is just a little screen so it can breathe, but so that you don't lose your flour. And then this lid, if you just push it, actually spins off. And then once you grind your flour, it will be in this container for you. So that's kind of handy. You don't have to have a bowl for this one. So just slide that back in here. So when you want to grind your grain, just put that in there, make sure it's lined up right. Shove it in, make sure it's in there nice and tight. And this one sounds more like a jet going off. It doesn't have that nice little grindy sound. You'll hear it just in a second. So I'll grind a little bit of the whole spelt again so you can hear the difference. With this one, it has a dial on the front here where you can adjust the speed and the rate that it feeds. So I'll just turn this on here. As I said, it sounds like a jet. Okay, so then when it's done, pull this out, get this baby out of the way, and again, I did not grind very much. I'm just showing you the basics of this. So again, I would do a lot more. So take the lid off, and here's your flour on the inside. And again, that's it. You now have flour. Okay, so that's it for making flour. If you wanted to have white flour, then you would run this through a series of sieves and it would remove the bran and the germ. But I don't do that because I like all the nutrition to be left in my flour. So again, you can grind any grain that you want to grind. It does not matter. It just depends on your mill, so make sure that your mill can do that. If you want to grind flaxseed or sunflower seeds or anything that's kind of an oily seed, you're going to have to make sure that your mill can do it. Most of these types of mills cannot grind those kind of seeds. So that's a whole different ball of wax. So let me show you now what I use for grinding corn. Okay, this mill is called the Quaker City Mill, available at Layman's. It is solid cast iron. If you look down inside, you can see the gear in here, and this one is hand crank, and this is a very, very heavy mill. It's a workout just holding this thing right now. So this is one that you're going to have to clamp to a tabletop, and it's a little bit of a trick to try to find the right width or depth, or what do you want to say, to be able to clamp on, because sometimes it's kind of picky about how much. So with corn, you just put the corn in here and start cranking, and it's a good workout. It will come out the bottom here. These are your plates, and you can actually see the plates right here. So these are just a metal plate. And when this comes out, it's a little coarse, not bad, but I actually like my cornmeal to be really, really fine. So when I make cornbread and things like that, so I will actually take that cornmeal once it's been ground and run it through my Como mill. and that makes it really, really fine, like the stuff you get in the stores. So if you want to grind corn, do not put corn in your regular flour mills. You will absolutely chew them up. I know some mills say that they can do that. I would highly recommend not doing that because the life of your mill will dramatically drop. It's way too hard on them because corn, especially when you get the dent corn or the flint corn or the Indian corn or anything like that, it is very, very hard stuff. So you want to make sure that you have a machine that can handle it. Okay, this is a Flaker mill. Let me bump this down here so you can see. I've had this one for a very long time. And basically what this is it's got the little hopper in the top here and the gears here, and then it dumps into this box right here. So you can clamp this one down on a table. This is also a hand crank version. And this is the one that you use for making Scottish oats or oatmeal or cracked grains. So I got a bag of oats to show you this. These are gluten-free raw oats, so they have the tendency to be a little bit softer than some of your grains. So really, really very easy. You just dump some in here. I'm gonna have to turn it to the side because my handle is long. And you just start cranking. There are different settings on it. This one has 3 different settings for the thickness. And so running it through here, it just flattens them. So this is the thicker setting, so it makes kind of a thick crushed oat. Okay, sometimes your grains will be kind of very, very dry, crunchy. So for instance, if I get my spelt back out here, I'll dump a little spelt in here. This is very dry. So when I grind it, sometimes the hopper will get plugged up a little bit, so you'll have to joggle the grains around. And you can clamp this down if you want to. I usually don't. So this is the spelt. You'll see it looks more like a Scottish oat. It's just kind of sort of flattened, but sort of crumbly. Now, if this isn't something that you're wanting, it's like, well, I actually want oatmeal. Sometimes when your grains are so dry, you will have to soak them in a little bit of water, and I'll show you that here too. Okay, so these are the gluten-free raw oats. I soaked these in a little bit of water so they've got just a hint of dampness to them. You don't want them wet, and so you only want to soak them like for 15 minutes or so if your grains are crumbling when you're trying to make oatmeal. So just put some of that in there. Start grinding. Okay, so I've been cooking on this for a little bit, and I don't know if you can see this or not, but what you wind up getting from the soaked oats looks more like oatmeal. It's just a flattened oat. But again, don't soak your grains very long. Sometimes even 15 minutes. You just want them slightly damp, and then dry them off because you don't want them plugging up your machine. But if they're just cracking on you, that's what's going on, is they're too dry. So you have to play with this a little bit, and each grain is going to be slightly different. But again, if you were growing this yourself and you got this straight off the field and it was nice and fresh and soft, and then you flattened it, rolled those oats, that would be the easiest. But sometimes we don't always get fresh off the field, or sometimes your grain might be a little bit old, and when it's older it gets really, really dry. So that's one way to get around having always cracked oats when you want oatmeal. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so after I'm done grinding flour, the very best thing to do is to use it immediately. But if you don't want to use it immediately, and like I grind a whole bunch at one time, I will bag the particular way and put it in the freezer, because when it freezes, you preserve the nutrients in it and it doesn't start to oxidize and go rancid on you. So a lot of times what I'll do, just to make this kind of handy, these are just little bread sacks, or just whatever you want to call these things. So a lot of times I will double bag these so they're nice and stout, like this. And then I will put that in a gallon Ziploc bag. So that way it protects it against the freezer, but then also if it gets banged around in the freezer, it's not gonna rip open on you and have flour all over your freezer. So it's just like this. So I will take my flour that we just ground, tip this down here for you again. And again, I usually have a big bowl of this, but then just put it in here. And then once this bag is full, I'll take these guys, take a twisty tie, put that around here, put it in my bag, squeeze the air out, Ziploc it, label it, and put it in the freezer. And then it's ready to go whenever I need flour. So that's what this is. It says unsprouted spelt on it, because sometimes I have sprouted spelt, sometimes it's unsprouted, depending on what I'm using. But this is great. So you can do that with all of your flours for storage. Very, very simple. So as I talked about in the video, it's going to be your choice as far as a grain mill goes. Just see what you can afford, see what is reasonable for your family. But again, you can grind wheat, any type of grain you want to grind. Even some of those little bitty seed grains like amaranth will also grind. Millet, quinoa, spelt, any of those. And you just dump them in your mill. Make sure you have your setting where you want. A lot of times when I grind my flour, especially on the stone mill, I use the finest setting, because when you have a really coarse setting, then you're going to have really coarse bread. So it's kind of nice to have a little bit finer flour. So hopefully that's helpful. If you have any questions, just leave your questions below, and we'll probably do sourdough next for one of the videos. So enjoy.